I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far. So I had to tell everybody because I needed help. You know, I needed someone to help me stand, and I needed someone to help. I needed someone to help me to get there.
She once told him on her own podcast that he raised her, and that if you don't like anything about her, blame him. And if you do, blame him too. That's not a line from a script. That's Christina Applegate, 37 years after she first walked onto a Married, with children soundstage as a 15-year-old, describing the man who played her TV dad. Today we're going through what she's actually said on the record about Ed O'Neill, about the show that made them both famous, and about everything that's happened since. The real story, not the rumor mill version. Christina Applegate wasn't new to show business when Married with Children began in 1987. She'd already spent years working as a child actor, including an infant appearance on Days of Our Lives that she'd later joke almost nobody remembered. But joining Married with Children at 15 put her in a different kind of environment than anything she'd experienced before. The show was one of the first original programs on the brand new Fox network, built deliberately to break every rule the traditional family sitcom had followed for decades. A loud, broke, miserable Chicago family who insulted each other constantly, instead of the warm households of shows like The Cosby Show or Family Ties. Ed O'Neill, already in his early 40s and an established stage and screen actor, was cast as Al Bundy, the failed former high school football star turned shoe salesman who narrated his own misery in almost every episode. O'Neill had come to acting by an unusual route himself, a former college football player who was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers and cut in training camp. He'd worked in a steel mill and taught social studies before discovering theater and eventually landing in television. Applegate was cast as Kelly Bundy, his teenage daughter, a character written, especially in the early seasons, as a ditzy, boy-crazy blonde whose storylines leaned heavily on jokes about her looks and her love life. That combination, an adult-oriented, envelope-pushing sitcom, and a teenage actress playing a character defined largely by her sex appeal, put Applegate in a position that would be unusual for any young performer. She spent the next 11 seasons on that set, growing from 15 to 26 years old, effectively living out her adolescence and the start of her adulthood inside a production built around adult content, live studio audiences, and a character whose main comedic function was being ogled. By the time Married with Children came along, Applegate had already spent almost her entire life in front of a camera. She was born in Los Angeles in November 1971 to a mother who worked as an actress and singer and a father who worked as a music producer. Her television debut came at just 3 months old, appearing alongside her mother on Days of Our Lives. And by age 7, she'd already made her first film appearance, picking up small roles on shows like Charles in Charge, Silver Spoons, and Family Ties along the way. What's less commonly known is that Applegate almost turned down the role that would define her career. In a later interview on Jimmy Kimmel Live, she confirmed that when she was first offered the part of Kelly Bundy, she said no, describing being uncomfortable with jokes in the material at the time. She eventually came around and took the role at 15. She wasn't alone in her hesitation either. Both Katie Sagal and Ed O'Neill have said publicly they had their own doubts about whether the show would work when they first signed on, and that it was ultimately the sharpness of the pilot script that won them over. Less than 2 years into the show's run, Married with Children ran directly into the culture wars of the era. On January 15, 1989, an episode titled Her Cups Runneth Over aired, centered on Al Bundy trying to track down a discontinued bra for Peg, and included a brief scene of Al ogling a nude department store mannequin. A Michigan homemaker named Terry Ricalta happened to watch the episode with her children and was outraged enough to start writing letters directly to the show's advertisers. Her campaign worked, at least in the short term. Companies including Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Johnson & Johnson pulled or suspended their advertising, and Ricalta went on television talk shows to press her case. Fox responded by shifting the show's time slot and pulling back some content, including an entire episode that was shelved and didn't air again until 2002. In the long run, the controversy didn't kill the show. Curiosity drew in new viewers, ratings rose, and within about a year, most advertisers had quietly come back. But in the moment, none of that outcome was guaranteed. And for a teenage Applegate, watching a national boycott take aim at a show she'd built her early career around would have been an unusually intense experience. For years, outside speculation filled in the blanks about what the relationship between Applegate and O'Neill was really like once the cameras stopped rolling. In August 2024, Applegate answered that question in her own words when O'Neill appeared as a guest on Messy, the podcast she co-hosts with actress Jamie Lynn Sigler. Introducing him to her audience, Applegate didn't hold back. She said she didn't even know how to explain him, that he raised her. So if people don't like something about her, that's his fault. And if they do like something about her, that's his fault too. She added that she'd spent years and years of her life with this man, calling him not just an incredible actor, but an incredible human being. She went further on that same episode, telling O'Neill that their relationship now, at 52 years old, meant more to her than she could easily put into words, being able to call him and talk for hours, laugh with him, and talk about everything. She specifically said she talks to him on the phone more than she talks to almost anyone else in her life. Notable from someone who's openly admitted she generally dislikes talking on the phone at all. She also pointed to something heavier. She said he went through everything with her, including her mother's battle with cancer. That's about as clear a signal as a person can give that a working relationship from a sitcom set had, over decades, become something closer to family. O'Neill, for his part, was warmer in substance than dramatic in tone, which fits his long-standing public persona. Dry, understated, not prone to grand declarations. Asked about working with Applegate, he called her a pro on set and said it was always fun working with her. At one point, Applegate's co-host Jamie Lynn Sigler brought up Julie Bowen, O'Neill's TV daughter on Modern Family, and jokingly pushed him to pick a favorite between his two television daughters. O'Neill didn't dodge so much as refuse to rank them. He said they were completely different people, but that both of them shared something he valued deeply: good hearts. By the time that podcast episode was recorded, O'Neill was 78 years old and had long since built a second major chapter of his career, starring for 11 seasons as Jay Pritchett on Modern Family. Even so, when he sat across from Applegate, the dynamic that came through wasn't two famous actors trading career highlights. It was closer to the easy, familiar rhythm of two people who'd simply known each other a long time. When married, with children ended in 1997, Applegate didn't disappear from television. She moved almost immediately into her own starring vehicle, the NBC sitcom Jaise, which ran from 1998 to 2000. She also built a film career, appearing in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, The Sweetest Thing, Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and The Vacation reboot, along with voice work in the Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise. She earned an Emmy Award for a guest arc on Friends and later starred in the ABC comedy Samantha Who, which brought her a Golden Globe nomination. She eventually took the role that would define the later chapter of her career, Jen Harding, a widow with a dark sense of humor, in the Netflix dark comedy Dead to Me, opposite Linda Cardellini. The show ran for 3 seasons, and it was during production of its final season that Applegate's multiple sclerosis diagnosis arrived. One of the more revealing things to come out of that same podcast conversation was how Married with Children actually ended. Applegate revealed that when Fox canceled the show in 1997, nobody from the network called to tell her directly. She found out, in her own words, from a guy who knew a guy who worked for her assistant at the time. O'Neill backed up the same account on the podcast. He recalled that months after the cancellation, a network executive finally acknowledged it directly, and O'Neill jokingly brought up how the cast of The Golden Girls had reportedly received cars when their long-running show wrapped. He didn't get one. Applegate, listening to him tell the story, said flatly that she never got a gift either. Neither of them received meaningful residuals from the show going forward. Applegate said she gets, at most, $1 every so often, and O'Neill confirmed his own payments were similarly small. It's a small, almost funny detail on its surface, but underneath it is something Applegate has described more seriously elsewhere. An 11-year chapter of her life that simply stopped, with no closure and no ceremony marking what the show and the people on it had meant to each other. The multiple sclerosis diagnosis wasn't the first serious health crisis Applegate faced publicly. In 2008, at 36, and while starring on Samantha Who, a routine MRI detected early-stage breast cancer, and testing revealed she carried a mutation of the BRCA1 gene. Rather than pursue radiation and years of repeated testing, she chose a double mastectomy, later having her ovaries and fallopian tubes removed as well after losing a cousin to ovarian cancer. In the years right after, she spoke publicly about the experience on shows like Oprah and Good Morning America. She later admitted, in a 2024 podcast interview and in her memoir You with the Sad Eyes, that much of what she said at the time wasn't fully honest. She'd presented it as an unambiguous blessing when privately she was struggling and crying most nights. She said that regret shaped how she chose to handle her MS diagnosis years later. This time, she wasn't going to perform being okay for the cameras. In August 2021, Applegate announced publicly that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic autoimmune disease affecting the central nervous system, with no cure. She learned of the diagnosis while filming the final season of Dead to Me, and production was paused for roughly 5 months so she could begin treatment. Applegate has spoken candidly about what that diagnosis meant for her, describing it as a period of processing the loss of a version of her life and herself she wasn't getting back. Everyday tasks like walking downstairs or carrying something became difficult. She said plainly that with MS, there's no such thing as a good day in the way people might imagine. There are simply different degrees of difficult ones. That diagnosis reshaped how she approaches both her career and her public life. She said she believes Dead to Me was likely her last major on-camera acting role, given how physically demanding a television production is on a performer's body. What she hasn't done is retreat from public life altogether. Instead, she's chosen to talk about the disease directly, and frequently with the same sharp, self-deprecating humor that built her career in the first place. A deliberate contrast to how she handled her breast cancer diagnosis years earlier. Applegate's first public appearance after revealing her diagnosis came on November 14, 2022, when she was honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She arrived using a cane, and her former married, with children co-star Katie Sagal, who played her TV mother Peg Bundy, stood behind her at the podium for physical support throughout the entire speech. Her TV brother, David Faustino, was also there, along with her Dead to Me co-star Linda Cardellini and the show's creator, Liz Feldman, all of whom spoke about her before she took the microphone herself. Applegate's own speech mixed humor with raw emotion. She recalled being 5 years old and standing on that same Hollywood street, watching people line up for the original Star Wars, staring down at the stars embedded in the sidewalk and wondering what someone had to do to earn one, and deciding, right then, that she wanted one for herself. Decades later, receiving that star, she told the crowd the day meant more to her than they could possibly imagine. She thanked Sagal and Faustino directly, telling them they were her everything, that she loved having started her career with them, and, in a sense, coming full circle back to them now. She said she didn't think of the people supporting her as friends, but as family, people who take care of her every single day, and without whom she wouldn't know what to do. The most emotional moment of the speech came when she turned to address her 11-year-old daughter, Sadie, in the crowd, calling her the most important person in the world to her. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, she'd posted on social media asking fans to help her pick out a walking stick for the event. On the day itself, she chose to go barefoot rather than wear shoes, explaining that for some people living with MS, the sensation of shoes can be uncomfortable or throw off their balance. A small, practical detail she shared publicly rather than hiding. The clearest public sign of how deeply the industry felt about her came at the 75th Primetime Emmy Awards in January 2024, where Applegate presented Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series. She walked onto the stage using a cane, arm in arm with host Anthony Anderson, as producers played Love and Marriage, The Married, with Children theme song. The entire room stood in a spontaneous ovation that lasted well beyond the usual applause for a presenter. Visibly moved, Applegate thanked the crowd, then undercut the emotion with a joke, telling the audience they were totally shaming her disability by standing, before adding, dryly, that her body wasn't the product of Ozempic. She went on to briefly reflect on her career, naming Kelly Bundy, Samantha from Samantha Who, and Jen Harding from Dead to Me, before mentioning that far fewer people remembered her actual televised debut as an infant on Days of Our Lives. That appearance also marked a turning point in how Applegate talked about her own future in the industry. She'd said around the same period that she believed her acting career was probably behind her. Even so, showing up at the Emmys at all was a decision she didn't have to make, and the ovation that met her was, in large part, the industry's response to that choice. Since her diagnosis, Applegate has built a new chapter of her public life around honesty rather than retreat. Her podcast, Messy, co-hosted with actress Jamie Lynn Sigler, who has lived with her own MS diagnosis for years, gives her a format that doesn't demand the physical toll a film or television set would require. She doesn't need to stand for long hours, memorize scripts, or hit production marks. She can sit, talk, and connect with an audience entirely on her own terms. That format has also given her the chance to bring people from her past back into conversation in a controlled, comfortable setting, which is exactly how the August 2024 episode with O'Neill came about. Rather than a chance run-in at an event or a brief red carpet exchange, it was a full, unhurried conversation between two people who'd known each other for 37 years, recorded specifically so that Applegate could ask him the questions she wanted to ask, on a schedule that worked for her health. She's used that same platform to talk openly about grief, about anger, about the version of her future she'd once expected and no longer has, and about what it's meant to have people from her past who genuinely know her stick around for the harder chapters. Ed O'Neill has consistently come up in those conversations as one of those people. There's no confirmed married, with Children Reunion Special, no announced revival, and it would be inaccurate to promise one is coming. What does exist, clearly and on the record, is a genuine, decades-long relationship between two actors who spent 11 formative years playing father and daughter on screen. A relationship that outlasted the show itself, survived a cancellation neither of them saw coming, and has now weathered two of the harder diagnoses a person can receive, coming out the other side as, in Applegate's own words, one of the most important relationships in her life. Ed O'Neill met Christina Applegate in 1987, when she was a 15-year-old still deciding whether she even wanted the part that would define her career. He was there through 11 seasons of a groundbreaking sitcom, through a boycott that nearly ended the show before it found its audience, and through a cancellation that came with no phone call and no goodbye. He was still in her life when she was diagnosed with breast cancer at 36, and still in her life when multiple sclerosis reshaped her relationship with her own body at 49. 37 years after they met, they sat down together, by her choice, and told each other, out loud, what that history has meant. That's the actual story that's been told, in her own voice, sitting across from the man himself. No leaked secrets, no anonymous sources, no dramatic reveal. Just two people who started working together in 1987, when one of them was 15 years old, who are still, by her own account, on the phone with each other more than almost anyone else in her life. If you want to hear the full conversation between Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill, it's available on her podcast, Messy with Christina Applegate and Jamie Lynn Sigler. What do you think their relationship says about the bonds people form on long-running shows? Let me know in the comments.